Welcome to Genomics Now, a podcast series where you can learn how genomics is developing in England's NHS. This podcast series is recorded in 2024 and is part of the North Thames Genomic Medicine Services Educational Toolkit. In each bite-sized episode, we explore what is changing in genomics. We answer the questions on genomics we've been asked by the different healthcare professionals. We talk about the ways genomics may impact different healthcare roles and how genomics can be used to successfully improve patient care. Hello, I am Dr. Shazia Mahamdallie, and I'm part of the North Thames Genomic Medicine Services Workforce Education and Training team. Welcome to today's episode. I'm thrilled to have Stephen Kelly and Sophie Scott from Guardant Health joining me. Stephen is the UK Medical Director at Guardant and comes with extensive experience in oncology medical affairs and from various pharma companies like Pfizer and Sanofi. And Sophie is the UK General Manager at Guardant and also brings a wealth of knowledge from oncology, diagnostics and partnership building, which you'll be hearing later in this episode. So in our previous episode, we heard from Professor Mike Hubank about the process of transferring technology into NHS laboratories. And Mike described bringing in-house to his pathology lab at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London, liquid biopsy testing for suspected lung cancer. So today, Stephen and Sophie will dive into how the industry has developed this cutting-edge technology and the exciting opportunities for partnership with the NHS to bring these advanced genomic diagnostics directly to patients. So thank you for joining me today and welcome, Stephen and Sophie. So, Stephen, can we start by telling our listeners about what liquid biopsy sets liquid biopsy technology apart and why it's considered cutting edge, as we often hear as a terminology, in the field of genomics?
Thank you. Yes, great question. For me, over the last 2 decades of working in cancer care, I've witnessed an evolution of how we tackle cancer with the advent of personalised medicines designed to treat specific genetic mutations, which ultimately has meant that patients have better outcomes and treatments that are more tolerable and perhaps conventional chemotherapies that we kind of grew up with in the early days. Secondly, it's often difficult to access or biopsy samples of the tumour. It can often be an unpleasant procedure for the patient, or tend to be very difficult, sometimes even risky. And with the comprehensive sequencing of the tumour DNA can take several weeks, sometimes delaying the initiation of the best treatment for the patient. So looking for circulating tumour DNA, this allows us to quickly and accurately profile the tumour with a simple blood draw that can be done at the patient's convenience. My last point is that the technology is evolving incredibly quickly. We're integrating genetics, epigenetics, and even AI. It's allowing us to further increase the sensitivity of our tests and analyse more features of the biology of the cancer. This means we can not only look for genetic drivers of the sort of advanced cancers, but we can also look for small amounts of recurrent or residual disease following curative treatments like surgery, where historically patients would just have had to rely on scans or symptoms to detect. Naturally, this also can take us into the cancer screening setting, where blood tests can be used to pick up early signs of cancer in otherwise healthy individuals. At Guardant, we're really proud that we can use this technology across the whole continuum of cancer, starting from screening, moving into the early, and then into the advanced stages of cancer, with an ultimate aim of improving the outcomes for patients and the experience for patients with cancer.
It's really interesting, isn't it, Stephen, how over time we're shifting that paradigm of not only using genomic technology for tissue biopsies, but now this paradigm is shifting to using the blood as a new technology for this. So Sophie, you've been really heavily involved in the partnership between Guardant Health and the Royal Marsden that's piloting the introduction of this new cutting edge technology of liquid biopsy testing into the NHS and into patient diagnostic pathways. So how was it that this partnership was born out between the two organisations, and how is it designed to enhance the use of liquid biopsy testing in cancer patients?
Yeah, so, liquid biopsy, whilst it is innovative, which Stephen touched upon just now, it is a very well-validated technology. For example, Guardant has published, over 500 peer-reviewed publications and has, done more than 1 million tests worldwide. So it's been around for many years, and and it is essentially ready for mainstream adoption now, and it has been for some time. The other thing is that, lung cancer, as Stephen described before, it's kind of the perfect place to start because there's many biomarkers, there's lots of drugs available, and it is difficult to biopsy. So being able to use the blood, makes a lot of sense in that respect. So since 2016, Guardant had been doing some collaborative research with the Royal Marsden, and this was done under the clinical leadership of Professor Sanjay Popat. And essentially, there were two really important lung cancer studies that we did. The first one was in 300 lung cancer patients who'd already been diagnosed. And what that showed was that you can find more biomarkers by using the blood, and you can find them quicker. And then the second one was conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was a smaller study, but it was really innovative and quite pivotal because it was 50 patients that were not able to access the biopsy services because of the COVID measures at the time. And so they had a suspected lung cancer on imaging. So essentially, it's not confirmed, but something is looking rather suspicious on the scan. And so they were able to access a liquid biopsy. And what that showed was that you can actually speed up treatment decision by 3 weeks. And actually, 37% of those patients, you could actually make a clinical decision, a treatment decision, before or without the tissue biopsy. So all that research, was really important in that partnership, essentially. On the other hand, the Marsden is a very, very reputable cancer hospital, worldwide. It's one of the 7 genomic hubs that deliver tests to NHS England. And so they were interested in actually being able to do the tests themselves. And so that's how the conversation about potentially transferring the technology so that they could perform the test came. And I think, I don't want to speak for them, but, Guardant 360 was the first FDA-approved liquid biopsy on the market. And so it was, I think, of interest for the Marsden to be able to offer that kind of validated service, in their lab.
Sophie, what you highlight there is a really interesting point about how the opportunity and when it's the right time, how these technologies can then be built up. And one other point that you had there was about the accessibility, so how this test has actually allowed better access to diagnostics and treatment, which is really critically important to patients when they're on that diagnostic journey and every day counts. So could you talk us through some of the key stages that were involved in that partnership between the Royal Marsden and Guardant Health, and what significant milestones have been achieved from that so far?
Yes, at the risk of repeating myself a little bit, obviously the work that we did together with the Marsden, obviously in lung cancer, those 2 studies I just talked about, but we also did other work in other tumour types. There was the plasma match study. That was a breast cancer study, probably the biggest breast cancer liquid biopsy study in the world at the time. I don't know of a bigger one yet. And I think giving the Marsden clinicians, that experience of the quality and the clinical utility of the Guardant technology was really, really important. Again, these positive experiences did trigger an interest in that collaboration, as I said before, about being able to perform the test in-house. So the data generated during the COVID led NHS England Genomics and Cancer Services to initiate a really unique pilot called the ctDNA transformation pilot. And this was to assess the feasibility and implementation of liquid biopsies, within a NHS clinical setting. And this was really to try and help speed up the diagnosis. And this is a world first program. This hasn't been done in any other public healthcare system in the world, which really demonstrates NHS England's leadership on this. So these things sort of all happened in parallel. So you've got the research, you've got NHS England, wanting to be able to implement this in the NHS. And then in summer of 2023, that's when the lab at the Marsden became operational. As you can imagine, it doesn't happen overnight that you would transfer technology in a different country. You know, we've got a lab in the US, and so that there was a lot of work, you know, from both the Marsden and Guardant to be able to do that. The Royal Marsden lab became operational in summer 2023, and then in March this year, March 2024, NHS England announced that 10,000 suspected lung cancer patients across England would be able to access liquid biopsy through one of two national genomic hubs, one of which is the Marsden. And so that's a really pivotal milestone in that partnership and collaboration.
Sophie, you talk there, so we've got NHS England that's essentially allowed this opportunity to happen and driven it forward in the sense of processing and operations. And you've got the Royal Marsden that has tested the technology in there in-house, and you've provided the technology. So that partnership is very synergistic. And you've talked about all of the positive things. So when you're coming to these kind of partnerships where it's third-party NHS systems, were there any challenges that you faced? And, for example, and how were they overcome?
Yeah, I mean, with any changes to service, there's always going to be teething problems, challenges, especially when you're trying to implement something in an otherwise well-defined service. So yes, there were, you know, difficulties at the beginning, which you would expect, but actually these were overcome really quickly. And the ctDNA transformation pilot so far has been a real success. The Marsden team have been an absolute pleasure to work with. And so that collaboration has been a really positive experience. But I can't not mention the UK lung cancer clinical community, so the doctors, who have just been absolutely pioneering, really. And so they've really had, you know, a lot to do with this, and they're obviously a very, very passionate group of doctors, but also, you know, the pragmatic approach and patient-focused approach of both the Royal Marsden and NHS England have really helped to overcome some of these, you know, these small issues, I would say.
So essentially, when it comes to these partnerships, what you really need to have is like energetic stakeholders, and have all the stakeholders that are involved in it. They've got the energy to bring it forward. And then those small problems, as you call them, although I'm sure they weren't so small, can be overcome because there's an energy, a positive, and there's a dialogue there between everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Stephen, our podcast series is called Genomics Now, but I'd like to come back to you at the end of this conversation and think about what's next for this technology. So, looking to the future and from an industry perspective, what advancements and developments do you anticipate for liquid biopsy ctDNA testing to improve patient care?
Certainly, yes. I mean, I'm in this podcast talking about the progress we've already made in comprehensive genetic sequencing using liquid biopsies and how this has improved cancer care in patients today. But as Sophie mentioned, you know, most of this progress has been, led specifically in lung cancer in the UK. However, we want to continue to partner with the healthcare providers, the NHS, as Sophie has mentioned, to really look at how we can use this technology in many other cancer settings where this innovation can be used, such as, you know, cancers of unknown primary, where we may not be able to even know where to biopsy, breast cancers, and others already recommended in EU guidelines. As Sophie mentioned, you know, this has been around for a while, and actually there are reasonably comprehensive guidelines out there. So we want to take the next steps forward. Or truthfully, any other setting where it's difficult to access tissue. I mean, this example that you discussed of collaboration across genomics, the clinical, you know, leadership, NHS England and industry could really expand further into earlier applications of liquid biopsies in other advanced diagnostics and the applications across many other diseases also. The NHS has established already the genomic networks of excellence to identify new areas where this technology can help improve the care of patients, and we really hope that we will continue to partner with the NHS as we have to ensure that everyone across England and the UK gets equity of access to the best possible care, and that we can offer with the aims of ultimately improving patient outcomes with liquid biopsies and progressing our goal to use this technology and data to beat cancer.
So would I just be right in saying, Stephen, that those cancers where it might be difficult to biopsy would be potentially those that we prioritise, but it would also be those cancers where there's a target, a genomic target in which there is a treatment for? They would be the ones that would be at the forefront of potentially a next wave.
Yeah, absolutely. We've targeted our assays specifically for those patients with actionable driver mutations that we can target with medicines and improve their outcomes. As you say, there's sort of an expanded remit in how we can use these assays, whether it's difficult to access or those cancers like lung cancer, where there's been kind of an explosion of targetable medicines to help patients with specific genomic alterations. My prediction is that in the future, this will go into other settings, such as identifying patients with a prognostic benefit to some medicines, or perhaps avoiding medicines that might cause adverse events. We should ideally be able to use liquid biopsies to understand the patient's biology to help us optimize whatever treatment is right for the patient.
I'd love for us to all join up again in 5 years' time and see where we are and how many cancers that we might be able to count on our hands that this technology has worked for. Thank you both for joining me today. Over this series, we're trying to bring in information to this technology of liquid biopsy testing into the NHS. And you really demonstrated today how that positive synergy and partnerships between healthcare industry and the NHS are in bringing cutting edge technologies to improve patient outcomes. And that's exactly what the networks of excellence are for and these partnerships are for. So thank you both for joining me and helping us understand this.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Genomics Now, a series of conversations hosted by healthcare professionals. The North Thames Genomic Medicine Service aims to complement other genomic-focused educational tools with these bite-sized podcasts. So do visit our website for more resources and updates on genomic-based clinical developments and research. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share your thoughts and spread the word by tagging the North Thames Genomic Medicine Service on social media.